In our parsha, we learn of Ma'amad Har Sinai, that incredible encounter between the Jewish people and God, where he came down and he presented them the Torah. And there was an incredible amount of preparation that went into this. The Jewish people didn't just get the Torah, but they were told by Moshe that there was a 3-day preparation period. He went to them, he prepared them, he asked them, are you ready to accept the Torah? And they said, absolutely. And as we'll see in the following parsha, that when Moshe came to the Jewish people and said, are you willing to accept the Torah? They said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do, and then we will listen. 100%, absolutely, we will keep the Torah. Before we even understand it, before we've even heard it, we trust Hashem. We trust that Hashem will give to us that which is good for us. And therefore we'll do it, and later on we'll understand it and we'll hear it. And this shows their incredible dedication to the task, that they were prepared to jump into receiving the Torah, even though they didn't really know what they were getting. However, there seems to be a contradiction to this particular answer of the Jewish people. And that is that in this week's parasha, the Torah says that the Jewish people gathered betachtit har, at the foot of the mountain. But literally, betachtit har means they were under the mountain. What does it mean under the mountain? They weren't under the mountain. So the Talmud tells us that Hashem picked up the mountain over their heads and said, receive the Torah, accept the Torah, and if you do not accept the Torah, sham tihi kavuratchem. This is where you will be buried. You will die. In other words, Hashem forced the Jewish people to receive the Torah. But that doesn't make sense. We already said that the Jewish people said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will accept it willingly. If they pledged and they said to Moshe that they will accept it willingly, then why did Hashem have to hold the mountain over their heads and force them to accept the Torah? It doesn't make sense. This is a very famous question. One of the commentators who deals with this is Tosfot in Tractate Shabbat. And Tosfot says as follows. He says, it's true that they had previously accepted the Torah and that they would accept it unconditionally. But when at the actual time it happened, and there was incredible thunder and lightning and fire, they became frightened. And there was a possibility that they would pull out. And therefore Hashem had to say to them, you can't pull out. And this is something that we find often in life, that people describe to you something and it sounds fantastic, you're prepared to do it. Somebody says, you want to go bungee jumping. Let's go bungee jumping. It's such fun, it's such an adrenaline rush. And you say, yeah, I'm going to go bungee jumping. And then when you're actually standing there at the bridge and you're looking down into the crevice and there is the river miles below, and now suddenly they're tying this cord to your feet and they say to you, jump. Not so soon. At the actual time, it becomes completely terrifying and frightening. And that's maybe what happened over here, that the Jews were in theory ready to accept the Torah, but when it came to the actual giving of the Torah, which is a scary event, perhaps now they were going to step back. And that's where Hashem had to step in and say to them, no, you're going to accept it. There is another answer, and this is given by the Midrash Tanchuma, in fact, in Parshat Noach. And it says as follows, that it's not a contradiction, because there are actually two Torahs. The one is the Torah Shebichtav, the written law. And Moshe came to them and said, this is in the written law. And he described to them what was in the written law. Do you want to accept that? And they said, yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll accept the written law. It's not so hard. It's quite straightforward. But then when it came time to give the Torah, they learned that over and above the written law was the oral law. And the oral law is endless. And the oral law takes the written law and expands upon it and explains it. And it takes things that seem to be very, very simple and they become far more complicated. And that's where the Jewish people stood back and said, hold on a moment. We accepted the written law. We didn't accept the oral law. The oral law, that's far more complicated. There's thousands of statements in the Midrash and the Talmud. We can't deal with that. We can deal with the written law. We can't deal with the oral law. And to that Hashem said, tough. You're going to have to accept it. And if you don't accept it, then I'm going to drop the mountain upon you. So that is the distinction. And that has always been a difficulty that the Jewish people have had to deal with. This impasse between the written law and the oral law. Because when one reads the written law, it's actually quite straightforward. The written law says, build a sukkah. Okay, so we're going to build a sukkah. It's just a few verses in the written law. But when you get to the oral law, there's an entire tractate about a sukkah. How high it must be, how low it must be, how wide it must be, what type of a roof it must be. It becomes so complicated, people say, I can't deal with this. It's far too complicated. So when did the Jewish people accept the oral law willingly? If at the time of the giving of the Torah they accepted the oral law because they were forced to, when did they accept it willingly? And we have a tradition that it was at the time of Purim. At the time of Purim, when the Jewish people were faced with extinction, with genocide, that was where the Megillah tells us, Kimu v'kiblu. They accepted upon themselves that now we're going to even accept the oral law willingly. And it's interesting because Purim, in fact, is a festival of the oral law. It's something that came right at the end of the period of the written law, of the written Torah. So we have these two different types of Torah. The written law, which on the one hand seems to be basic and simple, and yet we have the oral law, which is something that is splendid. It expands upon Judaism. It's never ending. And it shows us that Torah can go on and go on and go on, and that we should accept it gladfully and fulfill it with passion. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.